Hi, everyone. Welcome to the call. We're just going to wait a few minutes for more people to join us, so just hang tight. Welcome, everyone who's joined. We're just going to give a couple more minutes for more people to join us today.
Hi, it's Felicia. I'm here.
So we're going to get started in just a couple more minutes and wait for a few more people to join us. Thanks. Well, welcome everyone to this week's call. We're going to just get started and be conscious of everyone's time. So my name is Diana Call. I'm the Executive Director for the St. George Dinosaur Discovery Site, as well as the Vice President of Fundraising and Advocacy for the Utah Museums Association. So welcome to the Utah Cultural Sector Community Update. So just some quick housekeeping things. There is a closed captioning option down at the bottom of your screen, so please turn that on if you need it. We also have a question and answer feature in the chat box, so you can type your questions in there and we'll get to your questions later on. And I'd like to thank our partners. So thank you to the Utah Department of Heritage and Arts, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, the Utah Cultural Alliance, the Utah Humanities, the Utah Museums Association, and local arts agencies from across the state. So before we get to our speakers, I'd like to take a moment of silence to mourn with those that mourn. So even though our intentions to achieve representational parity are good, we have not done anything close enough to make real change. So in this moment, we're going to practice the silence required to listen, to learn, and to ensure that those who are hurting know that they are loved and that we stand with you. Typically, we feel the need to act with a plan for what to do next, but now our plan is to get our house in order and then follow the lead of those who have been unheard. And I want to encourage us all to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations and do the work necessary in order to break systemic racism, and discrimination in our own personal circles of influence. So just sit with me and mourn. Thank you for doing that with us. So today we will be discussing how to access additional CARES funding, both in Salt Lake County and throughout the rest of Utah. We will hear from Dina Blaze and Lincoln Schertz during our call today. So Dina Blaze is the Director of Regional Operations at Salt Lake County, and she is responsible for leading the county's efforts in planning, transportation, housing, community development, sustainability, and economic development. She came to regional development after serving as Associate Deputy Mayor of Finance and Administration under Salt Lake County's CFO. Prior to joining the county, Dina was the Chief Operating Officer of the Exoro Group, a public affairs firm specializing in public policy. She is the chair of the Utah Board of State History and serves on this Great Salt Lake Advisory Council. She is the chair, so today, she'll share information on the Salt Lake County grant program that is still in development, as well as the consumer sentiment survey. So Dina, take it away.
Great, thanks Diana. I really appreciate the invitation to join everybody today, and I'm really delighted to see so many faces, or excuse me, names on the list that I'm familiar with from my work as the chair of the Board of State History, so I'm delighted to be here. So, as you had mentioned, there's two things I wanted to bring to your meeting participants today, and the first is a grant program that we're working on at Salt Lake County. I am going to talk a little bit about this, and then I'm going to talk about a consumer sentiment survey that the county had put out into the field that we've got the results back from. So the first is a grant program. As many of you know, the CARES Act funding that came from the federal government, Salt Lake County received about $203 million as part of that allocation. We are currently putting our budgets together for how those funds are going to be spent. And of course, one of the important carve-outs within those funds that were provided for in the federal legislation was for economic stimulus. And I've had many conversations in the past couple of weeks with Vicki Borns and Jill Love and others, and Crystal, about the importance of us making sure that the artists in the community don't fall through the cracks with regard to this funding. So that's one of the things that the county's grant program is going to be focusing on. So we're probably going to be launching it in the next week or two. We're still finalizing application details and working through some of the back-end logistics, particularly trying to learn from the prior grant programs and financial aid programs that have come out. And we're hearing the frustrations from small business and from self-employed individuals about not having enough technical assistance and support in completing those applications. We're also focused on reaching diverse and underserved populations with that. So translating our application, we're taking some time to get that done and so forth, and just doing the outreach that we need to do to try to reach some of those businesses that were so hard hit. There's something I want to share my screen that I think will help us, help me talk to you a little bit about our focus of our grant program. So I'm going to just show you a slide here that talks about the impact of the health orders. So this is really going to be the focus of our grant program. We want to be able to connect the dots intentionally between the health orders that were issued by Salt Lake County and those businesses that were most directly impacted. So I've illustrated here the health orders that were issued. The first one on the 16th affected, of course, mostly food service establishments. Only a few days later, the county issued another order that reduce the number of people, of limited gatherings, from 50 people to 10. So we know there are performance venues and galleries and museums and lots of gyms and fitness centers and yoga studios and so forth that were really hard hit by that second health order. The third one really closed a lot of personal care service businesses like cosmetologists and massage therapists and so forth. So I can tell you that right now, one of the main focus for this grant program that we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks is to address these businesses that you see here. Now you'll see on the slide that we've been able to enumerate some of those businesses. That's because they have a licensure requirement with the health department. So we're using that as a means of trying to reach out. Where we don't have that information is after that second health order, which is where I'm hoping all of you on this call are going to help us get the word out to artists and actors and lighting specialists that might be working at some of the theaters and so forth. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute, because we want to talk about this process. So many of you are familiar with Zoom Grants. Our application is going to be a Zoom Grant platform. We're still working through our budget to see how much money we're going to make available, but the goal is to reach as many, as I said, artists, actors, people in the creative arts and performing arts as we can, along with all those other businesses as well. Our grants will be the lesser amount of either $50,000 or the substantiated financial loss that that small business can provide. So if a business can prove that they've had a financial impact of $35,000, $45,000, up to $50,000, then that's what the grant amounts will be. I'm happy to take any questions about that. I don't know if you want me to take questions about the grant program now or after I do the consumer survey. Diana, do you have a preference on that?
Let's wait until the end of
Okay.
both presentations. Thank you.
Okay, then I'm going to jump really quick into the consumer survey. So what I want to share with regard to this is that the county we were spending an awful lot of time. First, let me stop sharing that one, sorry. We were spending an awful lot of time worrying about how businesses were getting ready to reopen as part of the reopening of the economy. But what we were finding is that there was very little information to talk with consumers about whether or not they were even interested in participating in the economy. So we put a poll into the field with 800, I'm going to skip over this slide, with 800 individuals and in Salt Lake County. And what we discovered is this. I'm going to just go through the top 6 things that we learned from this survey. The vast majority of respondents are concerned that leaders will lift restrictions on public activity too quickly, as opposed to not quickly enough. And which was interesting because just over half say they're more concerned about the effects of the virus on the economy than on public health. So even though that was split pretty evenly, we were still receiving clear indications that folks are concerned that leaders are going to lift the restrictions too quickly. We know that in recent weeks, leisure activities such as haircuts and going to the gym and going to, especially to entertainment functions, are significantly less common than those considered essential. We know that. We knew we were going to see that in the poll. We didn't know quite to the extent. But what's interesting is that this is a 2-phase poll. So we put these questions out into the field the week of May 8th to May 16th, and we'll be putting these same questions back out into the field probably the second week of June, and see what's changed, since many of the communities we know have moved from orange to yellow, or in some cases from yellow to green, according to the state's classification. We do know that in general, higher income residents are slightly more comfortable at participating in commercial activities, and that wasn't a surprise either, but it did help us begin to quantify and understand that. There were sentiments that we heard saying that coronavirus has significantly impacted about 73% of the population, but not in terms of job loss, even though we know the job losses have been substantial. In fact, 6 percentage points above where it was before COVID struck. We're looking at substantial unemployment. The unemployment was not what really got people thinking about whether or not they were going to engage in the economy. It had to do primarily with the prior COVID financial position of those folks who answered those questions. And again, it wasn't surprising that those who were more concerned about the economy were more comfortable participating. But I put a caveat on that comfortable participating, because they were very clear in their responses, and I'll share with you in just a minute what conditions they expect businesses to be providing in order to maintain that comfort level for them to re-engage in the economy. So residents, of course, reported that they were most likely to visit businesses that are following the local health and safety guidelines. And we wanted to drill down a little bit deeper in this one. And what we can tell you is that residents feel comfortable engaging with businesses that regularly sanitize surfaces and provide sanitization options for their customers throughout. So these were the big picture. And I wanted to, I'm going to jump through these, and I'm happy to share this with your group. Diana, afterwards, I'm happy to share this link either on the county's website, or I can give you this slide deck to share with everyone else. I am going to jump through this, and I apologize, I'm scrambling so fast because I wanted to show, this one is particularly important to us. The last few, these bars that are highlighted or that we've sort of called out are obviously those things that when we put this survey into the field, we're just beginning to open up, if you'll recall. So we didn't have a lot of information that came to us about these more leisure activities. Again, this is the question we're hoping to get a lot more information on when we put the poll in the field again. And this is an important one, I think, for for the folks on this call. So we know that high-income residents were most comfortable sort of re-engaging in these activities that you see on the far left side. But if you look down at the second to last item, going to a concert, play, or other live performance, income level doesn't seem to matter at this point about their reticence to re-engage in these kinds of activities. I've asked that Holly Yoakum from Salt Lake County, we're going to be sharing a lot of the crosstabs with her and making sure she has a chance to look at that. I'd love an opportunity for us to share any other data that you might have where we can begin to see what it's going to take for this to come back on as a possibility for folks. And then the last one here I have is really concerns about the coronavirus will have on the economy are significantly more willing to shop and go to public events than those who are more concerned about the public health impacts. And this makes perfect sense. If you're concerned about the economy, you're more willing to go out. If you're more concerned about the public health aspects of coronavirus and the concerns, you're less likely. So this one just reinforced what we were really already seeing. So this, again, folks, consumers are willing to go out if they are, and they're much more likely if businesses are following the local health and safety guidelines. But here's the list of items that we put out there. So you can see that regardless of this list of things that businesses need to be doing in order to make consumers feel comfortable, there is clear majority that consumers want to see this happen. The one thing that we thought was very interesting is that this second to last item, requiring all customers to wear face masks. This is the one question that people answered that were much less likely or much less comfortable doing that kind of thing. And this one is really critical at the county as we talk with Gary Edwards, our public health official. This is one of those weird anomalies in sort of the understanding and the way people think in their brains, in that sometimes I think there's a forgetfulness around sort of that personal responsibility that we should be wearing masks as well as consumers being out there. I can say that from a public health point of view. Clearly our consumer sentiment survey showed that there's still people are more comfortable when they are wearing masks, but we were a little bit surprised to see that 9% were really much less comfortable if they were going to be required to wear a mask when they go out and do their and re-engagement in the economy. So that's really, really a top level kind of look at what we found. Like I said, we're going to have a second round of the survey coming out. Probably in the field the second week of June. We'll have it by the end of June and are happy to share those results with you. And please know that most of this information that we're pulling in is really going to help us inform what we need to do with the grant program. And again, I'm happy to present more information about the grant program as we finish putting the kind of finishing touches on that. But just do know that we're very keenly aware of the arts and cultural community that's been impacted by this, and we're hoping that our grant program is going to be a real benefit to them. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have a lot of questions quite yet. So we'll let people trickle in with those. While you're thinking about your question, I will introduce our next speaker. So Lincoln Schertz is the Director of Government Affairs for the Utah Association of Counties. So he joined the Association of Counties staff in September of 2014 after spending 14 years as the Director of Government Affairs for the Utah League of Cities, specializing in the appropriations process, economic development, local government issues, and transportation. Lincoln was recognized by the Salt Lake Tribune as one of the top lobbyists of Utah. After 4 years of active duty service in the U.S. Army as a tank commander, Lincoln attended the University of Utah, where he earned a degree in political science and a second degree in economics. So Lincoln, take it away.
Thanks, Emily, for the time, and thanks, Dina, for that quick overview of what's happening in Salt Lake County. As it relates to the rest of the state, as Dina mentioned, the state and local governments are all working on the appropriations process for the federal CARES Act dollars that were intended for local governments. It's a little bit disjointed in the sense that the federal government did some direct appropriations to counties, Salt Lake County and Utah County, but then for everybody else, so all the other cities and counties throughout the state, they have to get their money through the state legislature. Myself and the director for the Utah League of Cities and Towns met with the Executive Appropriations Committee 2 weeks ago to talk about the distribution methodology that's going to be used for the CARES Act distribution and determined that we're going to be distributing based on population. So each city and each county will get a distribution of CARES Act dollars for their communities based on the population of those jurisdictions. The counties will get it based on the county-wide population. The cities will get it based on their city population. So there is, in essence, a bit of double counting, wherein the counties will still get some money even for population that's located within a municipal boundary. The total amount of dollars that are going to local government is about $670 million that are intended to be used for response to COVID. It cannot be revenue replacement. It has to be for costs related to the impact of COVID response. But that can include staff time. If there have been individuals on your staff that have been specifically dictated to COVID response, you can use it for those proceeds. And then also, if you change the way in which you're working, so distance working costs that have been incurred by a jurisdiction, as well as anything related to kind of the COVID response. So oftentimes cities are looking at it as they've kind of reconfigured playgrounds or reconfigured recreational sports activities. There have also been large discussions about heritage and arts programs and how we can support those programs in kind of the post-COVID atmosphere. The thing that's important to understand right now is the Department of Treasury at the federal level is still kind of determining what the guidelines need to look like. The only thing that's been made clear at this point is you can't use it for revenue replacement, but you can use it for most other expenditures. In terms of the heritage and arts programs, what you're going to have to do is apply through a process that will be established by each city and each county in a grants type program, as was described by Dina. Each county is going to come up with their own grant program for the economic recovery. And so long as you can make the case that you are using the funds for a COVID response, and again, not revenue replacement, so it can't be lost ticket sales, but any other costs that you've incurred, most jurisdictions that we've been talking to are planning on working with the arts community in order to cover those types of responses. The question at this point is what each county and each city, what process they're going to set up. It's going to be a little bit difficult for me on this call to go through each process, but do know that most counties are actively working on kind of their grant process for both private businesses as well as the nonprofit arts community as well. If there are specific questions on a county-by-county basis, I'm certainly happy to answer those questions. But at this point, I think what's important to recognize is that I think most jurisdictions are actively wanting to work with the arts community on figuring out ways in which we keep you guys kind of moving forward with your mission to the extent that we can, and hope to use the CARES Act dollars as much as we can to cover costs associated with your guys' response to the coronavirus. Another last piece that I'll mention and then turn it over to question and answer is Congress right now is looking at a fourth stimulus package, which is called the HEROES Act. There's still a lot of questions as to whether or not that's going to come through and what it's going to look like. It has passed the House of Representatives. It's sitting in the Senate where they're debating kind of the merits of and the magnitude by which they plan on kind of moving forward with that package. That, to a certain extent, could change the entire dynamic of what happens. Again, in the HEROES Act, as it's currently configured, it would allow for some revenue replacement, and it's about a $3 trillion package. And so with those sorts of dollar amounts out there, it's pretty significant in terms of how that would change the atmosphere of funding both at the federal and the state level if we could start using it for revenue replacement, because I'm sure, like you, most jurisdictions have seen pretty significant revenue declines from the various tax sources or proceeds that they're traditionally getting. So we're currently keeping our eye on that first stimulus package, but for the time being, working with the CARES Act that we have here locally. Jill Love may be able to talk a little bit more about her engagement with the state legislature for the state dollars that have been appropriated for COVID response. What she asked me to cover today was just the local dollars. So that kind of is the quick overview. And again, happy to answer any questions if there's specific questions at all.
Well, thank you, Dina and Lincoln. So we do have one question, and I believe this is for Dina. Is the grant focused on arts and/or arts organizations?
Diana, no, it's not specifically targeted only for arts and arts organizations, but when we wrote as we began writing the eligibility criteria, we wanted to make sure we were not using any kind of language that would preclude artists or nonprofit organizations involved in the arts and cultural community to apply for those funds. So if you're an organization that can demonstrate a financial loss that's directly linked in Salt Lake County to the health orders that have been issued, then you will be eligible to apply for the grant program.
Great, thank you. And someone else asked if we can clarify the names of the two different programs. Dina, does yours have a name yet?
It does. It has the Salt Lake County Small Business Impact Grant Program. So SBIG for short.
And the remainder of the grant statewide are the CARES Act grant dollars. Again, the counties and the cities will have to determine how much they're setting aside for economic recovery and grants. But each jurisdiction is getting a portion of proceeds that's going to help with the overall COVID response. What they've got to determine is how much money they're going to set aside in order to help arts and heritage programs, which most have not been yet. As I mentioned, those dollars aren't getting appropriated by the state or by the counties until likely next week. And so that's when you're going to start seeing kind of a full force effort in determining how much money gets set aside for specific arts and heritage programs.
So Diana, I'd like to respond to one of the comments that Lincoln provided, which is really critical in Salt Lake County, and it may be relevant in other counties as this happens. So as Lincoln mentioned, Salt Lake County and Utah County received, oh, sorry, I will start my video. Salt Lake County and Utah County, because their populations are greater than 500,000, receive their own direct appropriation just like the state did. One of the tricky aspects that Salt Lake County is dealing with right now is that we're in the process of distributing funds to the cities within Salt Lake County. So that's not a direct appropriation from the federal government. It's going to be coming from the funds that the county received. So in the CARES Act, there are a couple of things that are very specifically stipulated, and Lincoln touched on one. One is that the funds cannot be used for revenue replacement. The other thing that is very strongly worded throughout is that the funds cannot be used with duplication of uses of the funds. That's the language they use. There cannot be duplication in the uses of funds. So the county and me and my team have been spending a lot of time talking with local economic development directors, because as they set up their grant programs, the last thing we want to have happen is that their grant programs are doing the same thing that our grant program is going to do, which would result in actually the county having to recapture those funds if they're inappropriately administrated based on the CARES Act. So we're actually having fantastic discussions with cities about how sort of the county can use its grant funds to look back at sort of trying to mitigate the loss that organizations have experienced, and the city's really using that piece of the CARES Act funding that they're getting from Salt Lake County to be more forward thinking in terms of providing programs that will enhance the resiliency of nonprofits and small businesses so that their recovery, we're not just stabilizing them, but we're really working to try to support their longer term recovery. In the ultimate goal is to just retain those businesses. We know they're, small businesses are sort of like they're the salt in the soup. They're the things that bring flavor to all of our communities. So we don't want to see them lost. And I think arts organizations fall into that category in particular. So we've been really delighted at the response we've been getting from the economic development directors at the cities and their willingness to look at how we leverage each other's allocation to make sure that we're looking at long-term recovery efforts and not just sort of stabilization alone.
Great, thank you, Dina. Another question is for Lincoln. Is there a process for applying for the CARES money from the counties yet?
Not yet. As Dina mentioned, she's working on the process for Salt Lake County, and Utah County, I know, is actively working on their process because they're already in the receipt of their funds. For the other 27 counties and cities within those counties, the funds have not yet been distributed from the state. So as soon as they get their check, I would presume most of those counties are going to be starting that process. And if it's helpful, I'm happy to work with Jill and this group to set up a call with the county commissioners throughout the state for those not located in Salt Lake and Utah County to work through a process so that there is kind of a statewide process, albeit administered by the counties, for heritage and arts, and making sure that you guys have funding available for those types of programs that you're interested in. So that would only be applicable for the other 27 counties. As Dina mentioned, they're going to have their own kind of unique process in Salt Lake and Utah County just by the nature of them getting a direct appropriation from the federal government and having to check for that duplication of effort that she just described. But happy to help with the other 27 counties on their process. We're probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks out before that's going to occur, and the funds are actually in the bank accounts of the counties and cities in those upper areas.
And Diana, I can say on behalf of Salt Lake County, we are looking at the distribution to cities based on a population formula. So like Lincoln said, I think the other counties are probably going to be looking at what's available to them and the cities within their jurisdictions, but that's how the county is doing it with the cities within Salt Lake County.
And when we're talking about $650 million going to local government throughout the state, if it's helpful, Jill, I can get you a copy of how much in total will be going to counties and cities statewide so that you guys can kind of have a flavor of how much is available. Again, that shouldn't be represented that all of that's for heritage and arts. That's for the entire COVID response. But it'll at least give you some indication as to how much is available by jurisdiction based on the population formula that's been established by the state. The last thing I'll kind of note on that is the state has requested that we do the funding in tranches. So while we do have the $600 or so million going out, all of which has to be spent by December 30th, or it has to be returned to the federal government. The legislature's asked that we do it in 3 equal tranches. So essentially, we're going to take that $600 million and distribute $200 million at the time, roughly speaking. I'm using rough math in these big numbers, but it's roughly $200 million in each tranche will be going out to the various counties and cities. We'll do that in June. There will be another tranche that goes out in August, and then the last tranche will go out in October.
Great, thank you for clarifying that timeline. Another question we had was, direct loss of revenue is the biggest thing that's COVID related for our organizations. Are there any discussions about those dollars being available to help with that?
This is Lincoln. Unfortunately, the CARES Act is pretty clear that you can't do it for revenue replacement, but there are a host of expenditures that I think you can kind of reconfigure how you're articulating how the funds are being spent to cover some administrative costs, as well as cost to reconfiguring venues to accommodate crowds in this post-COVID environment. So any of those sorts of costs can certainly be absorbed through the CARES Act dollars, but looking back and looking what you've lost in terms of ticket sales or any of those sorts of things, it's pretty clear that you can't use it for that revenue replacement.
So Diana, I'd like to talk about that because this is an important part of Salt Lake County's grant program. we are going to be determining the amount of money that organizations are able to receive based on a formula that looks at what your expected revenue would be minus your actual revenue. So even though we're using revenue loss as the calculation of how much of a grant you would be eligible for, the funds have to be used for fixed operating costs. So rent and mortgage, payroll, utilities, insurance, inventory, things like that. So the way I
Uh-oh, Dina, you've frozen. Maybe if you turn your video off, you'll come back.
And Dina, if you don't come back by turning your,
Oh, sorry, your digital photography.
there
So
you go.
yeah, so if you can show as part of the grant program, if you can show that you have not been able to go to that festival, you have a letter or an email from the festival saying we're canceling, and you've been to that festival before, and you know how much you would have made in revenue or sales at that festival last year, you were there last year, right? Then you can show us that, and you will be eligible to include that amount of money in your grant. Now, the assumption is, and we will require that you provide reporting after the fact, that that money has been spent on your rent of your studio, of your sort of your income. That's your income that comes to you, whether you're an S corp or a sole proprietor. That's kind of your pay that you pay yourself. That's lost payroll. That's your lost revenue. So even though we're using that as a means of calculating what your grant amount would be, we expect those artists to be using that for their inventory, for their supplies, for the things they would have had to produce in order to be able to go to that festival and participate and engage in those sales. So I hope that makes sense. There's one other example that I want to bring up, and that is a nonprofit organization that may have revenue from events, or maybe they rent out their space, and that's revenue that they're losing, as opposed to contributions that they receive on a regular basis. Those contributions are not seen as that substantiated lost revenue, especially if they're annual and they're coming in. But if you do have events that you host, or like I said, venues that you lease out for activities or events, that is lost revenue to you and can be used as part of the calculation of the grant. But that money, again, has to be spent on your fixed operating costs. So that's kind of how the direction we receive from our district attorney's office about how we're structuring the grant program.
Great, great. And so I would assume that that also means, so musicians applying for lost work is very similar.
Absolutely. And really all the artists have to show is that something got canceled. They have a contract to have performed in a string quartet for 4 dinner parties or for a small gathering. If they've got a cancellation notice that they can share, that'll be some of the documentation that we expect them to upload to the grant program to help substantiate the loss that they experienced as a direct result of the health orders being issued by Salt Lake County.
Okay, great. And then will these funds be available to cities within the county or just for nonprofit organizations?
So there's 2 different buckets. So the grant program, which is it's the small business impact grant program for Salt Lake County. We will be directly giving money to businesses, nonprofits, artists, sole proprietors, estheticians, tattoo artists, massage therapists, those folks who were impacted by the health order. There's a second sort of tranche of money that, based on a population formula, will be going out to the 17, 18 cities now and the townships. It is going to be up to those cities to develop their own grant programs. But again, here's where the rub is. If they decide to do a grant program that's entirely for arts organizations, we have to work in concert to make sure that they are not spending the money the same way we are. Because let's say, for example, ABC Nonprofit gets a $40,000 grant from us for those costs that they want to spend, their rent and so forth, their fixed operating costs. If they also get a grant from, let's say, South Jordan to do the very same thing, then if and when the county is audited, which it probably will be beginning on the 10th of January, if those monies have been administered improperly at the city level, meaning that they've been used in a way that duplicates the uses that the county has already used those for, we will have to claw those back. And those will come back from the business and or the city. So that is something we absolutely must avoid. So we're working really hard with the cities to make sure we're not going to be duplicating the uses of those funds. This is a really critical component that we have to work with the cities on.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. So we did get the name of the grant. It's the Salt Lake County Small Business Impact Program. Is that correct, Dina?
That is correct.
Excellent. All right, are there any other questions? Looking in this, I think we've got them all answered. So for the remainder, we were going to just quickly go over a few of the kudos going out in the arts community for kind of shifting and pivoting the way they have with COVID. So I'll just run through those real quick. So one of them is the Utah Opera Costume Shop, who's been making masks for the Salt Lake Regional Medical Center, and other medical groups in the area. The similar thing has been going on with the Living Planet Aquarium, who've been sewing masks. The Utah Museum of Fine Art and the Southern Utah Museum of Art have donated art supplies to their local schools. We also have Finch Lane, who has shifted into food distribution, which that's a neat thing going on. And then Utah's SBA Rapid Response Team has volunteered for the cultural nonprofits to help them access the PPP and EIDL funds. So contact one of them, especially with UCA, to figure out all of that stuff. So we've all been moving around and doing new things. And many local individual artists are auctioning off their work on behalf of a variety of organizations that they will help with COVID relief. So I think that's everything. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're just going to wrap up a couple minutes early. Thank you to our presenters, Dina and Lincoln, for providing all that great information. And our next call will be in 2 weeks, every other week now, so June 15th, and we'll see you then. Thanks.